I never believed in God. Not really. Sure, I'd nod along when someone mentioned the man upstairs, but deep down, nothing. 15 years hauling freight across this country, and I figured I'd seen enough of life to know there wasn't some divine plan. Just asphalt, diesel, and deadlines. My name's Mike Harmon. 43 years old, divorced twice, and married to my Peterbilt 389 more than I ever was to either ex-wife. Route 66 was my second home. What's left of it anyway, running alongside the interstates that replaced the mother road decades ago. That day started like any other, coffee too hot to drink at a truck stop outside Tulsa, Oklahoma. Dispatch buzzing in my ear about a time-sensitive load that needed to be in Flagstaff, Arizona by morning. Double pay if I made it happen, triple if I got there early. Harmon, you're the only one who can make this run, my dispatcher said, knowing exactly how to stroke my ego. Client's desperate, you in or out? I should have said no, should have told him my rig needed maintenance. The brake pads were worn thin, and I'd been putting off getting them replaced for weeks. Always another load, another deadline, another paycheck. But triple pay? That was a month's mortgage in one haul. I'm in, I said, already calculating how I'd make up the time on the downhill stretches through New Mexico and Arizona. Send me the details. Little did I know, those words would be the beginning of the end of everything I thought I knew about this world and what might lie beyond it. The load was heavier than I expected. Medical equipment bound for a hospital in Flagstaff. Expensive stuff packed in crates that made my trailer sit low on its suspension. I did my pre-trip inspection the way I always did. Quick, cursory checking boxes without really looking. The brake lines? I gave them a glance. Saw the wear. Saw the risk. Decided it could wait one more haul. Just need to baby her on the downhills, I muttered to myself, patting the dashboard like you would an old dog. We've done worse, haven't we, girl? I pulled out of the loading dock at 2:17 p.m. GPS said I'd hit Flagstaff around 4:30 a.m. if I maintained legal speeds. But with triple pay on the line, I figured I could shave a couple hours off that estimate. The first few hundred miles were smooth sailing, I-44 west through Oklahoma, cutting across a slice of Kansas, then into the Texas Panhandle. Night fell as I crossed into New Mexico. The stars came out brilliant and cold against the desert sky. No moon that night. Just darkness and the reach of my high beams cutting through it. The radio kept me company, classic rock stations fading in and out as I crossed from one broadcast range to another. I was making good time. Too good. Pushing the speed limit, taking curves faster than I should. The load shifted once or twice, making the trailer sway. Warning signs I chose to ignore. Just outside Albuquerque, I pulled into a truck stop to fuel up. Another driver, older guy with a salt and pepper beard, was filling his tank across from me. Headed west? He asked, making small talk the way truckers do. Flagstaff, I replied. Time sensitive, triple pay if I get there early. He nodded, but something in his expression changed. You taking I-40 through the mountains? That's the plan. Brakes good. That's a hell of a descent into Arizona. I felt a twinge of something. Not quite guilt, not quite fear, just a momentary acknowledgement that I was taking a risk I shouldn't be taking. They're fine, I lied. Just had him serviced last week. He studied me for a moment like he could see right through the lie. Well, be careful out there. Mountains don't care how important your delivery is. I brushed him off with a wave. Been doing this 15 years. I know how to handle a grade. As I pulled away from that truck stop, his words stayed with me. Not enough to change my mind, but enough to plant a seed of doubt. I pushed it down, cranked up the radio, and merged back onto the interstate. The sign said, Arizona, 117 miles. I was making excellent time. What I didn't know then was that those would be the last easy miles I'd ever drive. The border between New Mexico and Arizona is marked by the Continental Divide, the invisible line where raindrops falling on one side flow to the Pacific and on the other side to the Atlantic. It's also where I-40 begins its long descent through the mountains toward Flagstaff. The first warning sign read, steep grade ahead, trucks check brakes. I slowed down, more out of habit than actual caution. Downshifted to a lower gear to let the engine help with braking. Standard procedure. But as the grade steepened, I pressed the brake pedal to shave off a little more speed. The pedal felt different, softer than it should be. Less resistance. "Come on, baby," I muttered, pressing a little harder. The truck slowed, but not as much as it should have. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. The second warning sign. 7% grade next 8 miles. Trucks use low gear. I was already in low gear. The speedometer was creeping up, 55, 60, 65. I pressed the brake pedal again, harder this time. There was a moment of resistance, then a sickening pop, followed by the pedal going straight to the floor. No resistance. Nothing. No, no, no! My heart rate doubled in an instant. I pumped the pedal frantically. Nothing. The brake line had finally given out completely. The truck was picking up speed now. 70, muppy 75. The weight of the loaded trailer pushing me forward like a bullet down a barrel. The steering wheel vibrated in my hands. I reached for the CB radio. "Breaker, breaker! This is eastbound heavy load on I-40 mile marker 235. No brakes, I repeat, no brakes. Clear the lane." Responses crackled back immediately. "Copy that, driver. Traffic's light ahead. You got about 2 miles clear. There's a runaway truck ramp at mile 230. Can you make it?" Jesus Christ, be careful, brother. 5 miles to the runaway ramp. 5 miles of winding mountain road with no way to stop 80,000 pounds of steel and cargo, now doing 80 miles per hour. I'd never been religious, never prayed, never believed, but in that moment, with death staring me in the face, something broke open inside me. "God," I whispered, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. "If you're real, if you're out there, help me. Please help me." The words felt foreign in my mouth, but as soon as they left my lips, a strange calm washed over me. Not resignation, something else, something I'd never felt before. The truck hurtled down the mountain, gaining speed with every second. 85 miles per hour now. The tires screaming against the asphalt, the engine roaring in protest, and ahead, headlights, a line of cars, innocent people who had no idea what was bearing down on them. I had seconds to make a decision. The line of cars ahead, maybe 5 or 6 vehicles, had no idea what was coming. My trailer was loaded with medical equipment, heavy enough to obliterate anything in its path. If I stayed on the road, people would die, maybe a whole family, kids. I yanked the wheel hard to the right, aiming for the narrow shoulder. The truck lurched, tires screaming as they fought for grip. The trailer started to jackknife behind me, swinging out like a pendulum. Warning lights flashed across my dashboard, a Christmas tree of imminent disaster. "Stay with me!" I screamed, fighting the wheel as the rig threatened to roll. The shoulder was too narrow, rocks and scrub brush flying past my window. Beyond that, nothing but a sheer drop into darkness. The line of cars passed by on my left, a blur of headlights and brake lights. Someone honked, probably wondering what kind of maniac was driving a semi on the shoulder at 85 miles per hour. They had no idea they'd just escaped death by inches, but I wasn't out of danger, not even close. The runaway truck ramp was still 3 miles ahead, and my speed was still climbing. 87, Matumf, 88. The engine screaming, the frame of the truck vibrating so hard I could barely see. That's when I saw it, a slight widening in the shoulder ahead, followed by what looked like a service road cutting back into the mountain. It wasn't on any map I knew, wasn't marked with any sign, just a dirt path barely visible in my headlights. No time to think, no time to question. I wrenched the wheel toward the opening, bracing for impact as the truck left the pavement and hit dirt. The cab bounced so hard my head slammed into the roof. Pain exploded behind my eyes, but I held onto the wheel. The service road cut sharply uphill, a blessing in disguise. The steep incline immediately began to sap my momentum. 80 metium, 75, 70. The truck shuddered and groaned as the tires dug into loose gravel. The trailer was still trying to swing around, still trying to pull me off the mountain. "Please," I whispered again, not even sure who I was talking to. "Please." 65 mitra, 60. The road curved ahead, impossible to take at this speed. Beyond it, nothing but open air and a 1,000-foot drop. I had one last card to play. I cranked the wheel hard left, deliberately sending the truck into a controlled skid. The trailer swung wide, then slammed back against the mountainside with a sound like a bomb going off. The impact was devastating, metal tearing, glass shattering, but it bled off more speed, 50 to 40. The curve was coming up fast. I was going to die here. I knew it with absolute certainty. "I'm sorry," I said aloud, though I wasn't sure who I was apologizing to. My ex-wives? The dispatcher who'd sent me on this run? God. 30 Mapu. The curve just yards away now. And then, the strangest thing. A figure standing in the road ahead. A man silhouetted against the darkness, just standing there, calm, still, right in my path. I yanked the wheel instinctively, trying to avoid him. The truck responded with the last of its momentum, veering away from the curve and toward what looked like a wider section of road. The truck shuddered to a stop, the engine dying with a final wheezing cough. Steam hissed from the hood. Something in the trailer was still settling, metal groaning against metal, but I was alive. Somehow, impossibly, I was alive. My hands were frozen to the steering wheel, my body locked in place by adrenaline and fear. Slowly, trembling, I managed to pry my fingers loose, reached up to touch my forehead where it had hit the roof. Came away with blood on my fingertips. I looked out the windshield, searching for the figure I'd seen, the man in the road. There was no one there. Just darkness and dust settling in my headlights. Had I imagined him? A hallucination born of terror and concussion. I fumbled for the door handle, pushed it open with shaking hands, nearly fell as my legs, weak as water, struggled to support me. The night air was cold against my sweat-soaked skin. "Hello," I called out, my voice small against the vastness of the mountain night. "Is anyone there?" No answer, just the tick-tick-tick of cooling metal and the distant whisper of wind. I staggered a few steps from the truck, trying to get my bearings. That's when I saw where I was, a small, flat area carved into the mountainside. Not a service road at all, but some kind of old scenic overlook, long abandoned and reclaimed by nature. And beyond it, just feet from my truck's front bumper, the mountain fell away into nothingness. One more second of momentum, one more yard of distance. That's all it would have taken for me to go over the edge. I fell to my knees, the gravel biting through my jeans, and for the first time since I was a child, I began to cry. I don't know how long I knelt there, sobbing like a baby in the dirt. Time seemed to have lost all meaning. Eventually, I became aware of a sound, the crackle of my CB radio, still broadcasting from inside the cab. "Repeat, eastbound heavy load, do you copy? What's your position? We've got emergency services standing by." I crawled back to the truck, pulled myself up into the seat and grabbed the handset. This is Mike Harmon," I managed, my voice raw. I don't know exactly where I am, some kind of overlook off the highway. My brakes failed. The truck is damaged, but I'm alive." "Thank God," came the reply. "Can you see any landmarks? Mile markers?" I looked around, squinting into the darkness. "No, nothing like that. I'm maybe 2-3 miles past, where the grade starts coming down from the Continental Divide. There's some kind of old scenic overlook or something." There was a pause, then. "I think I know where you are. That's the old Route 66 overlook. It's been closed for years. Hang tight, we're sending help your way." Route 66, the Mother Road. I'd been driving parallel to its ghost for years, never paying it much mind. Just another piece of American history slowly fading away. And now it had saved my life. I clicked the radio off and sat in silence, trying to process what had happened. By all rights, I should be dead. The truck should be at the bottom of the ravine, with me inside it. Instead, I was sitting here, breathing, bleeding, alive, and that figure in the road. I closed my eyes, trying to recall the silhouette I'd seen, just a shape against the darkness, a man standing perfectly still, directly in my path. No fear, no attempt to run, just waiting, as if he knew I would swerve, as if he knew exactly what would happen. "Who were you?" I whispered to the empty cab. No answer came, of course, just the distant wail of sirens as emergency vehicles began making their way toward me. I climbed out of the cab again, needing to move, to confirm I was really here, really alive. My flashlight was still in the side compartment. I retrieved it, clicked it on, and began examining the truck. The damage was extensive. The trailer had slammed into the mountainside hard enough to tear open its side. Some of the medical equipment was visible through the gash, expensive machines now broken beyond repair. The company would be furious. Insurance would be a nightmare. I might even lose my license over this, and yet all I felt was gratitude, overwhelming, incomprehensible gratitude. The beam of my flashlight caught something on the ground, tire tracks in the dirt. My tracks, cutting a path from the highway to this overlook, but there was something strange about them. They didn't show the chaotic pattern of a vehicle out of control. Instead, they curved gently, almost purposefully, as if I'd been guided here. That wasn't possible. I knew how hard I'd fought the wheel, how violently the truck had responded. These tracks should be erratic, showing the desperate struggle that had taken place. Unless I hadn't been alone in that cab. The thought should have seemed ridiculous, delusional, the product of trauma and fear. But standing there, looking at those impossibly smooth tracks leading to safety, I couldn't dismiss it. "Were you with me?" I asked the night sky, looking up at the stars. "Was that you in the road?" The sirens were getting closer now. Red and blue lights flashing in the distance as emergency vehicles navigated the treacherous mountain road. Help was coming. I was going to be okay. But I already knew that. Somehow, in some way I couldn't yet articulate, I knew I had been saved for a reason. This wasn't luck. This wasn't coincidence. This was something else. For the first time in my adult life, I felt the presence of something greater than myself. Something I'd denied for decades. Something I could no longer ignore. "Thank you," I whispered, the words unfamiliar but right. "Thank you for saving me." And in the quiet of that mountain night, I could have sworn I heard a reply, not in words, but in the sudden peace that filled my heart. The first responders found me sitting on a rock beside my ruined truck, staring up at the stars, with tears streaming down my face, and a smile they later described as strange and peaceful. What they couldn't see was that I was no longer alone. The paramedics checked me over, shining lights in my eyes, asking me questions to test for concussion. I answered mechanically, my mind elsewhere. They seemed concerned about my calm demeanor, probably expecting hysteria or shock from someone who just narrowly escaped death. "Sir, do you understand what happened here?" one of them asked, a young woman with kind eyes and a worried expression. "Better than you might think," I replied, which only deepened her concern. They wanted to take me to the hospital in Flagstaff, but I resisted. There was something I needed to do first, something important. "The cargo," I explained. "It's medical equipment for the hospital. I need to make sure it gets there." The state trooper who'd arrived on scene shook his head. "Sir, that equipment is damaged, and your truck isn't going anywhere. We've got a tow coming, but please," I interrupted, can someone check? Some of it might still be usable. It's important." The trooper exchanged glances with the paramedics, then nodded reluctantly. "Wait here." He and another officer approached the trailer cautiously, flashlights sweeping across the damaged exterior. I watched as they peered inside through the tear in the metal. After a few minutes, the trooper returned. "Most of it's pretty banged up," he said. "But there's one crate that seems intact. Heavy-duty packaging, says pediatric ventilator on the side." A pediatric ventilator. A machine to help a child breathe. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just cargo. This was someone's lifeline. "Can you get it to the hospital?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Tonight?" The trooper studied me for a moment, then nodded. "We'll make it happen." As they carefully extracted the ventilator from the wreckage, I sat on the back step of the ambulance watching. A strange thought occurred to me. What if this single piece of equipment was why I'd been saved? What if a child's life depended on this delivery? For 15 years, I'd been hauling freight across the country, never giving much thought to what was in my trailer, just boxes, crates, pallets, things to be moved from point A to point B. But suddenly, I was acutely aware that everything I transported affected real lives, real people. The paramedics eventually convinced me to go to the hospital. Mild concussion, they said, needed observation. I didn't argue. As they loaded me into the ambulance, I caught one last glimpse of my truck, broken, battered, but somehow still upright on that impossible overlook. "Thank you," I whispered again, knowing now who I was talking to. The hospital in Flagstaff was busy that night. The emergency room was dealing with a multi-car pileup from earlier in the evening. I sat on a gurney in the hallway, waiting my turn, oddly content despite the chaos around me. A doctor finally came to examine me, checking my pupils, asking me to follow his finger with my eyes. Standard concussion protocol. I answered his questions automatically, still lost in thought about what had happened on the mountain. "You're lucky," he said, making notes on his tablet. "Very minor concussion. We'll keep you overnight for observation, but you should be fine." "Lucky isn't the word I'd use," I replied. He glanced up, curious. "No, what word would you use?" I considered for a moment. "Blessed." The doctor's eyebrows rose slightly, but he didn't comment. Instead, he said, "The state police brought in a piece of medical equipment from your truck. A pediatric ventilator. Is it still working?" I asked eagerly. He nodded. "It is, and it arrived just in time. We've been waiting on it for a patient in the PICU, 8-year-old girl with severe pneumonia. Her condition was deteriorating, and our existing ventilator wasn't providing adequate support." My throat tightened. "Will she be okay?" "It's too early to say for certain, but her oxygen levels have already improved since we got her on the new machine." He paused, studying me. "You know, if that ventilator hadn't arrived tonight..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "Can I see her?" The question surprised even me. "The girl, I mean. Just to know she's okay." The doctor hesitated. "That's not usually allowed. She's in intensive care, and you're not family." "Please," I said, not entirely sure why it mattered so much to me. "I just need to see that it was worth it, that all of this happened for a reason." Something in my expression must have reached him. After a long moment, he nodded. 5 minutes, no more. And you'll need to be in a wheelchair. Hospital policy for concussion patients moving between departments. 20 minutes later, a nurse wheeled me through the quiet corridors of the pediatric intensive care unit. The lights were dimmed for the night shift, creating pools of shadow between the soft glows of monitoring equipment. She stopped outside a room where a small figure lay in a bed that seemed too large for her. Tubes and wires connected her to various machines, including a ventilator, my ventilator, that made a soft, rhythmic whooshing sound as it helped her breathe. A woman sat beside the bed, holding the child's hand. The girl's mother, I assumed. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, but there was relief in her posture now, hope where there might have been despair just hours earlier. "That's Emily," the nurse whispered to me. "She's been here for 2 weeks. Her condition took a turn for the worse yesterday. The doctors were concerned." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. This tiny human, fighting for every breath, had been waiting for the machine I was transporting. The machine that would have been destroyed if my truck had gone over that cliff. The machine that might have arrived too late if I'd taken the time to fix my brakes properly. The irony wasn't lost on me. My negligence, the very thing that had nearly killed me, had ensured this ventilator arrived when it was most desperately needed. As if sensing my thoughts, Emily's eyes fluttered open. Drowsy from medication, unfocused, but somehow finding me in the doorway. Our gazes met across the dimly lit room. She couldn't smile around the ventilator tube, but something in her eyes. A recognition, perhaps. Not of me specifically, but of something we now shared. She raised her hand slightly, a tiny wave. Without thinking, I waved back. In that moment, something shifted inside me, a certainty that none of this was coincidence. Not the brake failure, not the mysterious figure on the road, not the intact ventilator, not this child who now had a fighting chance because of a series of events that, by all logic, should have ended in tragedy. There was a plan at work here, a design I couldn't fully comprehend but could no longer deny. The nurse wheeled me back to my room, but I barely noticed the journey. My mind was racing, connecting dots I'd never seen before, recognizing patterns in my life that had always been there, but that I'd been too blind or too stubborn to acknowledge. That night, lying in my hospital bed, I did something I hadn't done since I was a child. I prayed, not out of fear this time, but out of gratitude, out of wonder, out of the profound realization that I was part of something much larger than myself. "I don't know why you saved me," I whispered into the darkness. "I don't know what you want from me, but I'm listening now. I'm ready to learn." And for the first time in decades, I slept without the weight of cynicism and doubt pressing down on my chest. Morning brought clarity and consequences. My dispatcher called, his voice tight with controlled anger. "What the hell happened out there, Harmon? The client's insurance company is having a field day. The cargo was worth over $1 million. "Not all of it was destroyed," I said calmly. "The ventilator made it. One piece of equipment out of 12? That's supposed to make me feel better?" He sighed heavily. "Look, I've got the maintenance records here. Your last brake service was over 4 months ago, despite multiple reminders from the company mechanic." I closed my eyes, accepting the rebuke. "I know. It was my fault. I put it off too long. The insurance investigators are going to have a field day with this. Best case scenario, you're looking at suspension of your commercial license. Worst case, negligence charges, maybe even criminal charges if they can prove you knowingly operated an unsafe vehicle." Once, this news would have devastated me. Driving was all I knew, all I'd done for 15 years. But now, I felt a strange calm. "I understand," I said. "I'll take whatever consequences come." There was a pause on the other end of the line. My dispatcher had clearly expected arguments, excuses, maybe even anger. My acceptance threw him off balance. "Are you okay, Harmon? The police report said you were talking about religious experiences or something at the scene." I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "I'm better than okay. For the first time in a long time, I think I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." "Right." He sounded uncomfortable now. "Well, stay in touch. We'll need your statement for the insurance claim." After he hung up, I lay back against the pillows, considering my situation. My career was likely over. Legal troubles loomed on the horizon. My bank account wouldn't sustain me for long without income, and yet I felt no anxiety, no fear. Just a profound sense that whatever came next was part of a journey I was meant to take. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. A hospital chaplain stood in the doorway, a kind-faced man in his 60s with a clerical collar and a gentle smile. "Good morning, Mr. Harmon. I hope I'm not intruding. One of the nurses mentioned you might appreciate a visit." I gestured for him to enter. "I would, actually. I have questions." He pulled up a chair beside my bed. "I hear those are the best kind of conversations." For the next hour, I told him everything: the neglected maintenance, the brake failure, the mysterious figure on the road, the impossible survival, the ventilator, the little girl. He listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "What do you think it means?" I finally asked. "Why was I saved?" He considered the question carefully. "I've been a chaplain for 30 years, Mr. Harmon. I've heard many stories of what people call divine intervention, some more convincing than others." He leaned forward slightly. Yours has the ring of authenticity to it. So you believe me, that God saved me. I believe you experienced something profound, something that has changed you." He smiled. "As for why, that's the question we all spend our lives trying to answer, isn't it? Why am I here? What purpose am I meant to serve? I need to know, I said, surprising myself with the intensity of my words. I need to understand what I'm supposed to do now. The chaplain nodded. In my experience, that understanding rarely comes all at once. It unfolds gradually as we make ourselves available to it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small Bible. Have you ever read this? I shook my head. Not since Sunday school as a kid. He placed it on my bedside table. Perhaps start there. And when you're discharged, I know some people who might help you continue this journey. As he stood to leave, I asked, do you think I'll ever know for sure who that figure on the road was? The chaplain paused at the door. Some questions aren't meant to be answered with certainty, Mr. Harmon. They're meant to be lived with, explored, embraced as part of the mystery that makes life so extraordinary. His eyes crinkled with his smile. But between you and me, I think you already know. And as he left, I realized he was right. I did know. Not with the kind of proof that would convince a skeptic or the person I used to be, but with a certainty that transcended evidence, a knowing that resided not in my mind, but in my soul. For the first time in my life, I understood what faith truly meant. The hospital discharged me the following day. No car, no truck, no way to get home to Oklahoma. The company wasn't exactly rushing to help me out after the accident. I sat in the hospital lobby, the chaplain's Bible in my hand, wondering what to do next. That's when a nurse approached, the same one who had wheeled me to see Emily the night before. Mr. Harmon, Emily's mother would like to speak with you if you're willing. I nodded, surprised but curious. The nurse led me back to the pediatric ICU, where Emily's mother was waiting in a small consultation room. She stood when I entered, a petite woman with tired eyes but a determined set to her jaw. Mr. Harmon, she said, extending her hand. I'm Sarah Winters, Emily's mom. I shook her hand, suddenly self-conscious. Mike, how is she doing? Sarah's face brightened. Better, much better. The doctors are cautiously optimistic. Her oxygen levels have stabilized, and they're talking about reducing her sedation tomorrow. She paused, emotion welling in her eyes. They told me about what happened, how you nearly died bringing that ventilator here. I started to protest, but she cut me off. The state trooper told me everything. About your brakes failing, about the accident, about how you insisted they check the cargo for anything salvageable. She took a deep breath. That ventilator saved my daughter's life. The doctors said she wouldn't have made it through another night on the old equipment. I didn't know what to say. The weight of her gratitude was almost too much to bear, especially knowing that my own negligence had caused the situation in the first place. I should have maintained my truck better, I admitted. If I had, none of this would have happened. Sarah studied me for a moment. Maybe, or maybe the ventilator would have arrived too late. Or maybe it would have been damaged in some other way. And she shook her head. I don't pretend to understand how the universe works, Mr. Harmon. I just know that my daughter is alive because that machine got here when it did. We talked for a while longer. I learned that Emily had been battling a rare form of pneumonia that had resisted conventional treatments. That Sarah was a single mother, working 2 jobs to make ends meet. That they lived in a small town about 50 miles from Flagstaff, and that Sarah had been sleeping in Emily's hospital room for 2 weeks straight. As our conversation wound down, she asked, "Do you have somewhere to stay? The nurse mentioned you were being discharged today." I shrugged. "Not yet. I'll find a motel, I guess, until I figure out my next move." Sarah hesitated, then said, "I have a spare room at my house. It's nothing fancy, but you'd be welcome to stay there while you sort things out. It's the least I can do." The offer took me by surprise. "That's very kind, but I couldn't impose—" "Please," she interrupted. "I insist. Besides, Emily would love to meet you properly when she's feeling better. You're something of a hero to her now." A hero. The word felt wrong, uncomfortable. I was no hero. Just a man who'd been saved by something, someone, greater than himself. But I needed a place to stay. And something about Sarah's offer felt right. like another piece falling into place in this strange new journey I was on. "Thank you," I said finally. "I accept." Sarah's house was a small, neat bungalow on the outskirts of a town called Winslow, a name I recognized from the famous Eagles song about standing on a corner in Winslow, Arizona. It was modest but welcoming, with a small front yard and a porch swing that creaked gently in the breeze. "It's not much," she said as she showed me to the spare room, "but it's home." "It's perfect," I replied, meaning it. After 15 years living mostly in the cab of a truck, any real home seemed like luxury. The next few days fell into a simple routine. Sarah would go to the hospital in the morning to be with Emily, returning in the evening with updates on her daughter's improving condition. I spent my days reading the Bible the chaplain had given me, taking long walks through Winslow, and thinking about what had happened and what might come next. I also had to deal with the aftermath of the accident. Phone calls with insurance investigators, statements for the police report, discussions with a lawyer the trucking company had reluctantly provided. The news wasn't good. My commercial license was suspended pending investigation, and there was talk of possible charges for operating an unsafe vehicle, but none of it bothered me the way it should have. Each time anxiety threatened to take hold, I would remember that moment on the mountain, the impossible calm that had come over me, the figure in the road, the sense of being guided to safety by unseen hands. On the 5th day, Sarah came home with a broad smile. "Emily's being moved out of intensive care. Her breathing has improved enough that they've taken her off the ventilator. She's asking to meet you." The next morning, we drove to the hospital together. I felt nervous, though I couldn't exactly say why. This little girl had become important to me in a way I couldn't quite articulate. Emily was sitting up in bed when we arrived, still pale and thin, but with a brightness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. A nasal cannula provided supplemental oxygen, but the ventilator was gone. "Emily," Sarah said, "this is Mr. Harmon, the truck driver I told you about." Emily studied me with solemn eyes. "You brought my breathing machine," she said, her voice raspy but clear. I nodded, suddenly tongue-tied. "Mum says you almost died doing it." Yes, there was an accident." She considered this for a moment, then asked, "Were you scared?" The question caught me off guard with its directness. "Terrified," I admitted. "Me too," she said simply. "When I couldn't breathe. It was the scariest thing ever." I moved closer to her bed, drawn by the wisdom in her young eyes. "How did you handle being so scared?" She shrugged one thin shoulder. "I prayed, and I talked to my angel." Sarah made a small sound, part sigh, part laugh. "Emily has an imaginary friend she calls her Angel," she explained to me. "He's been with her since she got sick." But I wasn't looking at Sarah. I was looking at Emily, whose expression had turned serious, almost adult. "He's not imaginary," she said firmly. "He's real. He stands by my bed at night and tells me everything will be okay." She tilted her head, studying me. "Did you see him too? On the mountain?" A chill ran down my spine. "What does he look like, your angel?" Emily thought for a moment. "Tall, with kind eyes. He glows a little, but not too bright. And he's very calm, even when scary things happen." And the description was vague, childlike, and yet it matched perfectly with the silhouette I'd seen standing in the road that night. The calm figure who hadn't moved, who had seemed to be waiting for me. "I think I might have," I said quietly. Emily nodded, unsurprised. "He told me you would bring the machine to help me breathe. He said not to be afraid." Sarah was watching our exchange with a mixture of confusion and concern. "Emily has a vivid imagination," she said, but her voice held a note of uncertainty. "It's okay, Mom," Emily said, patting her mother's hand. "Mr. Harmon understands." She turned back to me. "You didn't believe in angels before, did you? But you do now." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the simple certainty that only children seem capable of. "Yes," I admitted. "I do now." Emily smiled, satisfied. "That's good. They're always there, you know. We just don't always see them." We talked a while longer, about her favorite books, anything with dragons, her best subject in school, science, her cat waiting at home, named Pancake. Normal things, everyday things. But throughout our conversation, I couldn't shake the feeling that this child understood something fundamental about the universe that most adults had forgotten or never known. As we were leaving, Emily called me back to her bedside. "My angel says you have a job to do," she whispered. "Something important. He says that's why you didn't die on the mountain." I swallowed hard. "Did he say what that job is?" She shook her head. "Nope, but he says you'll figure it out." She reached out and took my hand, her small fingers surprisingly strong. "Thank you for saving me, Mr. Harmon." "I think we saved each other," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. That night, sitting on Sarah's porch swing under a sky full of stars, I tried to make sense of everything that had happened. The accident, the miracle, the ventilator, Emily and her angel. Sarah joined me, offering a mug of coffee. "Penny for your thoughts?" I accepted the coffee gratefully. "Just trying to figure out what comes next. My trucking career is probably over. I don't have many other skills." "What did you do before trucking?" I shrugged. "Not much. Some construction. A stint in a factory. I've always been a drifter, I guess. Never stayed in one place too long." She nodded, sipping her own coffee. "And now?" "Now?" I looked up at the stars. So much brighter here than they ever seemed from the cab of my truck. "Now I feel like I'm supposed to be doing something specific, something important, but I have no idea what it is." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "You know, there's a church in town that runs a program for long-haul truckers, support groups, safety workshops, that kind of thing. The pastor used to be a trucker himself before he found his calling. A ministry for truckers." The idea intrigued me. "They call it Highway to Heaven." She smiled at the name. "Cheesy, I know, but they do good work. They're always looking for volunteers who understand the life." I thought about it, about the loneliness of the road, the pressure to push limits, to skip maintenance, to drive tired, the disconnection from community, from faith, from anything beyond the next delivery. "Maybe I'll check it out," I said. Sarah hesitated, then added, "They also run a small mechanic shop, free brake inspections for truckers passing through, discounted repairs for those who can't afford full price." The significance wasn't lost on me. Brakes, the very thing that had failed me and paradoxically led to this new path. "Do you think—" I started, then paused, uncertain how to express what I was feeling. "Do you think all of this happened for a reason? The accident, Emily? Everything?" Sarah looked out at the night sky. "I've never been particularly religious," she admitted. "But when Emily first got sick, I was desperate. I prayed for the first time in years." She turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "And then you showed up with exactly what she needed, exactly when she needed it. So yes, I'm starting to think there might be more to this world than what we can see or prove." We sat in companionable silence for a while, the porch swing creaking gently beneath us. "What will you do when Emily comes home?" I asked eventually. "Go back to work, try to pay off the medical bills. Take one day at a time." She smiled ruefully. "The glamorous life of a single mom." An idea began to form in my mind, nebulous at first, then gaining clarity with each passing moment. "What if I stayed? In Winslow, I mean. I could help out with Emily while you're at work, and maybe check out that truckers ministry." Sarah looked surprised. "You'd do that? Stay here?" "I don't have anywhere else to be," I said honestly, "and for the first time in my life, I feel like I might have found where I'm supposed to be." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "We'd like that. Emily would be thrilled." As we continued talking into the night, planning and dreaming, I felt a sense of purpose settling over me like a comfortable blanket. The road ahead was uncertain, but for once, that didn't frighten me. I wasn't alone on the journey anymore, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I could almost hear a voice, calm, reassuring, familiar. "This is just the beginning. Rote rista caminhão." 2 weeks later, Emily came home from the hospital. The house, quiet and somber during her absence, suddenly filled with life again. Her laughter, her questions, her endless energy, despite her still recovering body. I had moved into a small apartment nearby, not wanting to impose on Sarah's hospitality indefinitely, but I spent most days at their home, helping with Emily while Sarah worked. The day after Emily's homecoming, I visited the Highway to Heaven ministry for the first time. It operated out of a converted gas station on the old Route 66 that ran through Winslow, a fitting location for a ministry dedicated to those who lived their lives on the road. The pastor, Jim Calloway, was exactly as Sarah had described him, a former trucker with 30 years of experience before he'd found his calling. A big man with a grey beard and hands that told stories of hard work. He greeted me warmly when I introduced myself. "Mike Harmon," he said, recognition flashing in his eyes. "I heard about what happened up on I-40. Word travels fast in the trucking community." I nodded, unsurprised. Truckers had their own grapevine, stories shared over CB radios and at truck stops across the country. "Come on in," Jim said, leading me into the main building. "Let me show you what we do here." The interior had been transformed from a gas station convenience store into a welcoming space, with comfortable seating, a small kitchen area, and a modest chapel. Photos lined the walls, truckers and their families, scenes from the road, gatherings and baptisms. We offer a place for drivers to rest, pray, talk, or just be still for a while, Jim explained. Hot meals, showers, laundry facilities. We host support groups for drivers dealing with addiction, depression, family problems, all the things that can come with this lifestyle. He showed me the mechanic shop next door, where two men were working on a semi's braking system. "Free safety inspections," Jim said, "and repairs at cost for drivers who are struggling financially. We believe no one should have to choose between feeding their family and maintaining their rig safely." The words hit close to home. How many times had I made exactly that choice? Putting off brake maintenance to cover my mortgage payment or send money to my ex-wife for child support? "And what do you ask in return?" I questioned, still somewhat skeptical despite my recent spiritual awakening. Jim smiled. "Nothing. Some drivers choose to attend our services or Bible studies. Some make donations when they can. Some just take what they need and move on. We're here to serve, not to judge or demand." We ended up talking for hours. I told him everything: the neglected maintenance, the brake failure, the mysterious figure on the road, Emily and her angel. He listened without interruption, nodding occasionally, his eyes thoughtful. When I finished, he said simply, "God works in mysterious ways, but rarely without purpose. The question is, what will you do with this second chance you've been given?" "That's why I'm here," I admitted. I think I'm supposed to help prevent what happened to me from happening to others, but I don't know how. My license is suspended. My reputation in the industry is shot." Jim leaned back in his chair, considering. "Maybe that's exactly why you're the right person for this work. You've been where they are, made the same choices, faced the same pressures, and you've seen the consequences firsthand." He outlined a vision: safety workshops for truckers passing through, focusing especially on maintenance issues, personal testimonies about the importance of proper brake care, outreach to trucking companies about creating cultures that prioritized safety over schedules. "We've been wanting to expand our safety program," Jim explained, "but we needed someone who really understands the life, who can speak trucker to trucker, someone they'll listen to." By the end of our conversation, I had a purpose and a volunteer position that would eventually become a paid role as the program developed. It wasn't much money, but combined with the settlement I'd received from the trucking company's insurance, significantly reduced due to my negligence but still enough to live on modestly for a while, it would keep me afloat. More importantly, it gave me direction, a way to transform my mistake into something meaningful, a path forward. The next 6 months passed in a blur of activity. I threw myself into developing the safety program, drawing on my 15 years of experience to create workshops that spoke directly to the realities truckers faced. Jim mentored me, teaching me how to integrate faith into my work without being preachy or judgmental. I learned basic mechanic skills so I could assist with brake inspections. I studied accident statistics and safety regulations. I reached out to former colleagues, asking them to spread the word about our free services, and I continued to help with Emily, whose recovery progressed steadily. She returned to school, regained her strength, and never stopped talking about her angel. Sometimes, when she described him, I would get that same chill of recognition, the absolute certainty that we were talking about the same being who had stood in the road that night on the mountain. Sarah and I grew closer as well. What had begun as gratitude on her part and a need for purpose on mine gradually evolved into friendship, then something more. Our first date was a simple dinner at a local diner after Emily had gone to sleep, her regular babysitter watching over her. We talked for hours, discovering all the things we had in common beyond our shared experience of the ventilator miracle. Life was taking shape around me in ways I'd never imagined. Community, purpose, faith, family, all the things I'd been missing during my years on the road without even realizing it. But there was one piece of unfinished business that continued to nag at me. One thing I needed to do to truly move forward. I needed to return to the scene of the accident. Jim agreed to drive me. My license was still suspended, and while the legal issues had mostly been resolved with community service and fines, I wouldn't be behind the wheel of any vehicle for at least another year. We set out early one morning, heading east on I-40 toward the Continental Divide. It was a clear day, the sky a brilliant blue, the landscape stretching out around us in shades of red and brown and gold. As we approached the area where my brakes had failed, I felt my heart rate increase. Memories flooded back, the terror, the certainty of death, the strange calm that had followed my desperate prayer. "It was right around here," I said as we began the descent from the Continental Divide. "This is where I first felt the brakes going soft." Jim nodded, keeping his eyes on the road. "And the overlook? Where you ended up?" "A few miles ahead. There should be an old access road on the right." We drove slowly, watching for the turnoff. I almost missed it. Just a narrow dirt track, partially overgrown with no signage or markers. If you didn't know it was there, you'd drive right past. "This is it," I said, recognizing the entrance despite the different perspective. "This is where I turned off." Jim carefully navigated the dirt road, which climbed slightly before opening onto the abandoned overlook. He parked, and we both got out, standing in silence as we took in the view. It was even more spectacular in daylight than it had been that night. A vast panorama of mountains and desert, the highway winding like a ribbon far below. And at the edge of the overlook, just feet from where we stood, the sheer drop that would have meant certain death had my truck gone over. I walked slowly to the edge, keeping a safe distance but close enough to feel the vertigo of the height. Jim stayed back, giving me space for this moment of reckoning. "I shouldn't have survived," I said, my voice carried away by the wind. "By every law of physics, by every probability, I should have died here." "But you didn't," Jim replied simply. I turned to look at the dirt area where my truck had come to rest that night. In the daylight, I could see what I hadn't been able to in the darkness, how perfectly positioned the old overlook was. How impossible it would have been to find this spot while hurtling down the mountain with no brakes, no control, no hope, unless someone had guided me here. I closed my eyes, feeling the sun on my face, the wind in my hair. "Thank you," I whispered, the words no longer foreign but familiar, comfortable. "Thank you for saving me, for showing me the way, for giving me purpose." When I opened my eyes, Jim was watching me with a smile. "Ready to go back?" I nodded, taking one last look at the view. "Yes, I'm ready." As we walked back to the car, something caught my eye, a glint of metal half buried in the dirt. I bent down to examine it and found a small, tarnished trucker's medallion. St. Christopher, patron saint of travelers. It looked as though it had been there for years, forgotten and abandoned. I picked it up, brushing away the dirt. It seemed right, somehow, that I should find this here. a symbol of protection for those on the road. "I'm keeping this," I said, showing it to Jim. "A reminder." He nodded in understanding. "Seems fitting." As we drove back toward Winslow, I held the medallion in my palm, feeling its weight, its history. I thought about all the truckers still out there on the roads, pushing their limits, skipping maintenance, taking chances. How many of them were on the same path I had been? How many might I reach with my story before it was too late for them? "You know," Jim said, breaking the comfortable silence, "we've been getting more truckers stopping by the ministry lately. Word's spreading about your safety workshops." "That's good," I replied. "That's really good." One of them asked me something interesting yesterday. He wanted to know if what happened to you, the miracle on the mountain as they're calling it, could happen to anyone. If God would save just anyone like that. I considered the question. "What did you tell him?" Jim glanced at me. I told him I didn't know, that God's ways are mysterious. But I also told him that maybe the point isn't whether God will save you from the consequences of your actions, but whether you'll listen when he's trying to tell you something before it comes to that point. I nodded slowly. The warning signs were there, the wear on the brake pads, the mechanic's reminders. I just didn't want to hear them. And now? "Now I'm listening," I said simply. "With everything I am, I'm listening." We drove on in silence for a while, the miles passing beneath us, the sky vast and blue above. I thought about Emily and her angel, about Sarah and the life we might build together, about all the truckers I had yet to meet, whose lives I might help change with my story. My last words on that mountain, the ones I'd thought would be my final utterance on this earth, had been "I'm sorry." An apology spoken to no one in particular as I faced what seemed like certain death, but they hadn't been my last words after all. Instead, they'd been the first words of a new life, a life of purpose, of faith, of service, a life worth being saved for. 1 year after the accident, I stood before a room full of truckers at our largest safety workshop yet. Over 100 drivers had gathered to hear my story and learn about proper brake maintenance. "My name is Mike Harmon," I began, "and I should be dead." I shared everything, my negligence, the brake failure, the miracle on the mountain, and Emily's ventilator. As I spoke, I could see recognition in their eyes. They knew the pressures, the shortcuts, the risks they took every day. I was given a second chance, I concluded. But not everyone gets one. Don't wait for your brakes to fail at 80 mph to realize what matters. That day, 67 drivers signed up for free brake inspections. 17 rigs were found to have critical safety issues that could have led to accidents. Lives were saved before they were ever in danger. The ministry's reputation grew. Trucking companies began sending their drivers to our workshops. Some even donated funds to expand our mechanic shop. What had started as my personal redemption story was becoming a movement. Sarah and I married in a small ceremony at Jim's church. Emily, now fully recovered, was our flower girl. She still talked about her angel occasionally, though the visits had become less frequent as her health improved. "He says his work with me is done," she told me the night before the wedding. "But he's still watching over us." My relationship with my own faith deepened. The questions remained, they always would, but so did the certainty that I had experienced something beyond explanation that night on the mountain. My commercial license was eventually reinstated. Several trucking companies offered me positions, but I declined. My place was at the ministry now, helping other drivers avoid the mistakes I'd made. Sarah, Emily, and I bought a small house not far from the old Route 66. For the first time in my adult life, I had roots, community, purpose. The restlessness that had driven me for decades was gone, replaced by a profound sense of being exactly where I was meant to be. 5 years after the accident, I published a book about my experience titled Brakes Failed, A Trucker's Journey from Negligence to Grace. It became popular within the trucking community and beyond, spreading our safety message further than I ever could have imagined. The ministry expanded to multiple locations along Route 66, each offering the same services: safety workshops, free inspections, spiritual guidance for those who wanted it. Thousands of trucks were made safer. Countless potential accidents were prevented. Emily grew into a healthy, vibrant teenager with an interest in medicine, inspired by her own experience. "I want to help people breathe," she would say, a direct echo of how she had been helped. On the anniversary of the accident each year, our family makes a pilgrimage to that overlook on the mountain. We stand at the edge, looking out over the vast landscape, remembering how close I came to death and the miracle that saved me. Last year, as we stood there, Emily tugged at my sleeve and pointed to a spot near where my truck had come to rest that night. "He's there," she whispered. "Do you see him?" For just a moment, a brief, impossible moment, I thought I did. A figure standing calmly, watching us with what I somehow knew was approval. Then it was gone, if it had ever been there at all. But the message remained as clear as it had been that night 5 years ago. None of us travels alone. Our journeys matter, our choices matter, and sometimes, when we least expect it, we're given a second chance to make those choices right. Those are the words I share now whenever I tell my story, the words that have become my life's purpose. The words that I once thought would be my last, but instead became my first. Thank you for saving me. I'm listening now.